When a man says, "I can't stop thinking about you," he's revealing far more than just a passing sentiment. This is not casual. This isn't just poetic language or something he says because it sounds good in the moment. No, this phrase is a signal of internal disruption. It means you've taken up residence in the architecture of his mind, not just emotionally, but psychologically. And what's most important here is not the words themselves, but what compels a man to say them. You see, the male psyche, particularly when it comes to intimacy, is not always designed for openness. Men, especially in contemporary culture, often socialize to compartmentalize emotion, to keep it locked down, to regard emotional vulnerability as weakness. And yet desire has a way of overriding those defenses. When a man finds himself repeatedly returning to thoughts of you, consciously and unconsciously, what he's experiencing is a kind of psychological tethering. A bond is forming, often before he fully understands it. His thoughts betray him before his words do. So when he says, "I can't stop thinking about you," he's offering a rare glimpse behind the curtain. He's showing you that your presence has become integrated into his internal dialogue. Not just in a romantic sense, but in a cognitive sense. You're not just someone he wants. You're someone whose essence is altering the way he thinks. And that is no small thing. Now, what causes this to happen? It's not superficial beauty, though attraction certainly plays a role. It's not just charm or wit or even kindness. It's resonance, psychological, emotional, and even spiritual resonance. You've triggered something archetypal in him, a sense of mystery, challenge, warmth, maybe even chaos. Jung might have described this as the animus encountering its counterbalance. And when that happens, it pulls a man out of the comfort of emotional autonomy and into the tension of longing. Longing, after all, is the birthplace of pursuit. And pursuit, for many men, is how they make sense of love. It gives structure to their emotion. But here's the key. When a man admits that he can't stop thinking about you, what he's really saying is that he's struggling to maintain control of that structure. Your presence, whether direct or in memory, keeps disrupting it. He's in a loop, a cognitive emotional spiral. And part of him likes it, part of him fears it, but above all, he needs to make sense of it. This is when craving takes root. Craving is not just about physical desire, it's about psychological obsession. And when a man craves your presence like a drug, it's because his experience of you offers him something he can't find elsewhere. It might be safety, or excitement, or a reminder of who he is at his best, or at his most raw. But whatever it is, it's potent, and it pulls him in. That's why this phrase matters. That's why you shouldn't dismiss it as just flirtation or emotional fluff. When said sincerely, it marks the moment a man begins to surrender to something he can't fully control, you, and more precisely, what you represent to him. So don't underestimate the power you carry in that moment. It's not just about being thought of, it's about becoming unforgettable. If he can't stop thinking about you, it means you've already become part of his internal world. And once you're there, he'll have to confront not just his feelings for you, but everything you awaken within him. And that is the true power of being desired. Not just to be wanted, but to be unforgettable. When a man tells you, "I've never met anyone like you," he's not merely making a compliment. He's revealing a rupture in his internal framework. This isn't about flattery. It's not a rehearsed line from some dating manual. It's the articulation of psychological dissonance. He is encountering a disruption, something unfamiliar in you that challenges his assumptions, expectations, and perhaps most profoundly, his emotional history. Think about what that phrase really means. "I've never met anyone like you." What does that imply? First, it means he has met many people, dozens, maybe hundreds, and none of them registered in his mind the way you have. None of them carved out that unique emotional imprint. So when he says this, it's an admission of exceptionality. It means you don't fit the mold he's grown accustomed to. You've introduced something unpredictable into his psychological environment. And the human mind, especially the male mind, thrives on categorization. Men tend to structure experience logically. Who fits into what box? What role a person plays? How to predict behavior. But when a woman emerges who doesn't fit the mold, that creates tension. And psychological tension is the beginning of obsession. It's what makes a person linger in the mind long after the interaction is over. It's what causes him to return to your texts, replay your voice, recall your expressions, not out of strategy, but because his internal map is being redrawn. You see, when he tells you he's never met anyone like you, he's confronting a kind of archetype, an ideal or energy he wasn't fully conscious he was looking for. Maybe you represent something that was missing in his life: emotional depth, intellectual stimulation, unpredictability, or perhaps a sacred kind of femininity that cuts through the noise of superficial connection, and it shakes him. Because now he can't go back to unseeing it. You've introduced a higher standard, and with it, a new longing. Is something deeply philosophical about this. In Plato's Symposium, the concept of love is tied to the idea of recognizing beauty. Not just physical beauty, but the beauty of the soul, the intellect, the essence. And when that beauty is rare, it doesn't just attract. It confronts. It forces the admirer to reflect on their own inadequacy, their own hunger, their own unfulfilled potential. That's what's happening here. A man who tells you he's never met anyone like you is saying, in essence, you're forcing me to reconsider what I want and what I thought I knew. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Often, that phrase is uttered not just from admiration, but from vulnerability. There's awe in it, but there's also fear. Because if he's never met anyone like you, then he has no roadmap for how to keep you. And men, like most humans, fear what they can't control. That's why some pull back after making that admission. Not because they don't mean it, but because they do. And it terrifies them. So what should you take from this? That your uniqueness is not a liability to be softened. It's a force to be respected. It's what disrupts patterns, elevates standards, and creates the kind of psychological impact that lingers in a man's mind long after the moment has passed. And in a world filled with repetition and predictability, being unforgettable is not just power, it's transcendence. When a man says to you, I can't stop thinking about you, he's not merely expressing infatuation. He's revealing that his psyche has been captured, perhaps even hijacked by the symbolic weight of your presence. We tend to underestimate how powerful certain individuals can become in our mental landscape. But when someone occupies our thoughts without conscious effort, it signals something deeper than surface level attraction. It points to psychological resonance. Let's dissect this through a psychological lens. Thought, at its core, is selective. The human mind processes thousands of stimuli per day. What it returns to, what it obsesses over, is not random. It's meaningful. It's symbolic. And when a man finds his thoughts magnetically drawn back to a woman, what we're witnessing is the unconscious mind wrestling with a new emotional reality. There's been a disturbance in his routine consciousness, and that disturbance has a name, a face, and a voice: you. Now, this isn't just biology, although it has biological roots. Neuropsychologically, infatuation triggers dopamine, our brain's reward chemical. But dopamine alone doesn't explain enduring obsession. What does explain it is projection. When a man says, I can't stop thinking about you, he's also saying, you've become a canvas for something I lack or deeply desire. Maybe it's connection, maybe it's intimacy, maybe it's the kind of feminine energy that offers both mystery and emotional safety. Whatever it is, it's compelling enough to override his usual thought patterns. Carl Jung talked a lot about the anima, the feminine image that exists within the male unconscious. When a woman embodies this image or even approximates it, the man is drawn toward her, not just as an individual, but as an archetype. She becomes a portal to meaning, to mystery, to a self he hasn't yet fully developed. This is why the woman he can't stop thinking about often brings up conflicting emotion. Desire, yes, but also confusion or even fear. There's another layer here too, time. For a man to notice he can't stop thinking about someone, a gap must have formed. He has to have missed her, which implies distance, silence, maybe even absence. That's critical because it's the absence that reveals the presence. We only become aware of certain needs once they're unmet. In your absence, he confronts the emotional vacancy that your presence once concealed. Now, this is important. When a man tells you he's never felt this way before, you have to ask yourself, what did you embody that evoked that response? Because that tells you something about your power. But it also tells you something about your responsibility. You see, if that phrase is sincere, he's placing a part of his soul in your hands. That's not the time to seek validation or manipulate outcomes. It's a time for discernment, for understanding the weight of what's unfolding and deciding if you're willing and able to hold it. That's where the real transformation begins, not just in his desire for you, but in his desire to become. That is what makes this phrase so much more than a romantic sentiment. It's a psychological threshold, and you, consciously or not, have become the door through which he might walk. So when a man says he's never felt this way before, pause. Don't just hear the words. Hear the depth beneath them. Recognize the moment for what it is, a turning point. And if you choose to meet it with presence, not performance, you might find that what he's really saying is this: you haven't just changed my day, you've changed my direction. And that's the kind of presence that doesn't just attract a man, it awakens him. When a man looks at you and says, I just want to be around you, you need to hear that for what it really is. Because it's more than a casual compliment, more than a sweet remark. It's a raw confession. And it says far more about his psychological state than most people realize. This isn't just about attraction. This is about emotional anchoring. He's telling you, sometimes without fully understanding it himself, that your presence regulates something inside him. Something he doesn't quite know how to name, but he knows when it's missing. Now, let's be very clear. When a man reaches this point, when he's not talking about physicality or admiration or even love in the conventional sense, but simply about presence, he's expressing one of the deepest emotional drives a human being can have, the need for resonance. He's saying that in your company, his nervous system finds a rhythm that feels good, safe, meaningful. And that's no small thing, because for many men, particularly those who carry invisible emotional burdens, simply being around someone who doesn't provoke anxiety, judgment, or inadequacy is profoundly rare. You become what Jung might call a symbolic sanctuary, a place where the chaos of his external and internal worlds feels, even briefly, ordered. Not because you fix him, not because you entertain him, but because who you are calms him. He can exhale in your presence, and he doesn't want to lose that. But here's the paradox, and it's a big one. The moment he starts needing your presence to feel okay, there's a subtle danger. Because if he doesn't consciously understand what it is about you that grounds him, he risks becoming dependent on something external to soothe something internal. That's the line between emotional connection and emotional reliance, and it's a slippery one. That's where your awareness becomes critical. If you're not careful, you might begin to perform that grounding role at the expense of your own balance, becoming his emotional caretaker rather than his partner. And if you do that, the dynamic begins to shift. He'll still crave your presence, but he won't grow from it. He'll stay emotionally static, using you as a psychological crutch instead of a mirror. So what do? You recognize the power you hold. And you hold it responsibly. You understand that making a man crave your presence isn't about being agreeable or endlessly available. It's about being anchored in your own center, so solid in who you are that he feels inspired to anchor himself to. You set a tone with your energy, with your truth, with your integrity, not with your sacrifice. When a man says, I feel like I can be myself around you, he's not just handing you a compliment. He's making a psychological disclosure, one that unveils a powerful inner shift. Because to feel like you can be yourself in someone's presence is one of the rarest and most meaningful experiences human beings can have. It transcends attraction. It even transcends compatibility. What we're talking about here is a kind of existential permission, a softening of the armor that most people wear without even realizing it. Every man walks around with a mask, often several. These are not necessarily acts of deception. They're survival strategies. He wears a mask at work to appear competent, at the gym to appear strong, in public to appear unshaken. But beneath all of that, there's a quieter self, one that questions, one that hurts, one that longs to be understood without performing. Most men, especially in today's cultural climate, don't even know what that version of themselves fully looks like, let alone feel safe enough to reveal it. So when he tells you he can be himself around you, what he's really saying is, you're not triggering the threat response in me. That's no small feat, because most social environments are saturated with judgment, expectation, and comparison. They demand persona, but your presence offers the opposite. It tells his nervous system, you don't have to prove anything here. You can just be. And when a man feels that for the first time or in a rare way, it registers in his body like a drug. He returns to it not out of addiction, but out of recognition of truth, of rest. Now, why is this important in the context of desire? Because while lust may be sparked by appearances, lasting emotional attachment is rooted in psychological safety. If he's able to be himself around you, then you've made space for vulnerability, and not the performative kind, real vulnerability, the kind that disarms pride, that allows for awkward honesty, that makes room for pain without judgment. That is intimacy. And intimacy, unlike lust, cannot be mass-produced. Philosophically, this experience aligns with what Martin Buber called the I-thou relationship. Most of our relationships are I-it. We relate to others as objects, as functions, as means to an end. But in rare moments, a person becomes a thou. Not something to use, but someone to encounter. Fully, respectfully, without distortion. When a man says he can be himself around you, he's describing an I-thou moment. And those moments tend to transform people. Here's the challenge though. This kind of relational space is delicate. It must be maintained. You can't coerce it. You can't manipulate it. You can't use it to control him. If you do, it vanishes. The very thing that made him open will be the thing that makes him retreat. So you must hold that space with integrity, with boundaries, yes, but also with compassion. Because once a man finds a place where he can stop pretending, he will protect that place, and he will be drawn to it again and again because it represents something he struggles to find elsewhere. The ability to exhale. So if you're hearing that phrase, if a man looks you in the eye and says, I feel like I can be myself around you, recognize the weight of that moment. It's not merely flattery. It's evidence that you've become more than a source of attraction. You've become a mirror for his authenticity. That is not only rare, it's sacred. Remember this, in a world where most people feel they must earn love through performance, being the one who grants the freedom to simply be is profoundly magnetic. And the presence that allows for authenticity will always be the one he comes back to, not just because he wants to, but because he needs to. When a man says, I've never felt this way before, he isn't just pointing to an emotional state. He's confessing an internal rupture, a shift in the architecture of how he sees himself, how he sees love, and how he relates to others. That statement, as simple as it sounds, often signals a moment when something deeply unconscious stirs. And if we're paying attention, we can see that it's not merely about novelty, it's about transformation. Let's unpack this a bit. Men are not by default disconnected from their emotions, but many have been trained socially, culturally, sometimes even biologically to compartmentalize them, to hold them in a private vault, guarded by logic and utility. When he says he's never felt this way before, what he's describing is a disruption to that system. Something or someone has bypassed the walls, and that bypass often feels like chaos at first. A welcome chaos perhaps, but chaos nonetheless. It's in that disorientation that something essential happens. He realizes he is not in control of his emotional experience in the way he thought he was. That can be terrifying, but it can also be exhilarating because suddenly he's tasting something real, something that can't be scheduled, reasoned through, or explained away. He feels alive, not just entertained, not just aroused, but existentially alive. You see, one of the most underappreciated facts about male psychology is that men crave intensity, not drama, intensity, depth, meaning, but they are rarely given the language to pursue it in a healthy relational context. So when he meets a woman who makes him feel something he's never felt, he registers that woman not just as attractive, but as revelatory. She reveals to him a part of himself he didn't even know existed. That kind of experience sticks.